Thank you very much. Well, as you're referring to the annual report and the ICC prosecutors annual, yeah, and I think it's important in that it's an important step along the way towards a full investigation. So the report essentially indicates that the prosecutors formed a preliminary view that the Russian Federation is in occupation of Crimea, and also that there may well be a international armed conflict in the east of Ukraine, which involves the Russian Federation. Now, these are not fixed decisions, these are preliminary decisions, but they are, as I said, important steps towards a final decision by the ICC prosecutor that she will then use to apply for a full investigation into both situations. Well, I think the most important part from a Ukrainian perspective of sovereignty is the fact that she has based her decision on an assumption that Crimea remains a part of the Ukrainian territory, and a recognition that the Russian Federation is in occupation is a recognition that their presence there and their authority there is a temporary authority, and at the point when the hostilities between Ukraine and the Russian Federation end, then Crimea should be returned to Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian possession. So it's important in that it's maybe the first international court as such, or first decision from an international court, even though it's a preliminary one, which says Crimea remains part of Ukraine. I mean, there are situations of occupation, obviously. I mean, there's Palestine and Israel, but this is fairly unprecedented. It's certainly unique in terms of the ICC, I think. Well, in order to find occupation, then the ICC prosecutor has to be satisfied first and foremost that Crimea remains part of the Ukraine territory, and part of that deliberation is looking at such things as who recognizes Crimea to be part of the Russian Federation. So she refers to the General Assembly and says the majority of the members of the General Assembly recognize Crimea to remain within Ukraine. So it's significant in that it provides the ICC with, or the ICC prosecutor with the assurance that in terms of recognition, the majority of the world recognizes Crimea to remain a part of the sovereign territory of Ukraine. So it's significant and it's important, and I think it will be the platform upon which the ICC prosecutor, almost certainly in my view, moves towards a full investigation, whereby she will end up identifying suspects within the Russian Federation who are responsible for war crimes, or may be responsible for war crimes within Crimea. Yeah, well, it's obviously a decision by the Security Council would be authoritative also, but it's also pretty authoritative to have a General Assembly decision where the majority of the states, and that's an important part of international law. What do the majority of states say is the situation in international law is a really important question for determining what is international law. So when the majority of states say Crimea remains part of Ukraine, that's extremely persuasive evidence that it does. Well, that's obviously a long subject. And I think what you've identified is the problem of the perennial problem, the continual problem of international law, that the more powerful you are, the more you can ignore it without consequence. One cannot get away from the fact that if Russian officials are accused of war crimes in Crimea, Russia is unlikely to surrender those people to the ICC, and the ICC doesn't have its own police force or its own force to arrest or go into Russia and arrest. So there's always going to be a problem of enforcement, especially against the greater powers. But that's not a reason, I think, to not have some hope that in the future, these decisions actually can be enforced. And, one has to look at, the international criminal system has existed, the modern one, for 20 years, and it's been pretty good, actually, in terms of the people it indicts, it eventually gets. Now, maybe not today, and maybe not in 5 years, and maybe not even in 10 years, but eventually these international courts do get those people they accuse before them, subject to the proceedings. I mean, Mladic and Karadzic, who were, Hromadske case, they took 15 years before they were detained, but eventually they were detained, and Karadzic has just been sentenced to 40 years, and Mladic will be, his judgment will come out in the next 6 months. So the arm of international law is increasingly long, and we never know what will happen in Russia in the next 5, 10 or 15 years, and what the political situation will allow, and whether somebody indicted from Russia will eventually find themselves in front of the ICC. It's not impossible. Well, I think there has to be, I've been here now with my company advising on these issues for the best part of 2 years, and I think there should be a greater collaboration between government and civil society in trying to collect information and evidence of violations in Crimea and in the East and send it to the ICC, because the ICC prosecutor has essentially said, I think there may be an occupation. I think there may be war crimes by the Russian Federation in Crimea. There may be war crimes by both sides in the East. What she needs is more information so she can make a final and safer determination, which will lead, if she's satisfied, to an opening of a full investigation. So her report should be taken as a encouragement to the government here and the civil society here to start to increase their activities, not decrease it, not to settle and think that the decision has been made. It has not been made. There still is a long way to go before the ICC prosecutor decides to apply for a full investigation, and even longer to go before that full investigation actually establishes who might be, named people who might be responsible for crimes in Crimea and the East. It's a great opportunity for Ukraine to establish some responsibility on behalf of the Russian state and on behalf of officials from within the Russian state, and it may well be the only way in which that responsibility can be established. So it's really a great opportunity which shouldn't be wasted. Well, I think that Mr. Hromadske and his team are really doing their best in very difficult circumstances to investigate and to prosecute, and it's not easy. I mean, these are complicated offences. Many of the critical witnesses or prospective witnesses seem to have left the country, which makes the situation very difficult. And I think, you know, it's any prosecutor, whether an international prosecutor or a domestic prosecutor, would struggle with the weight of these crimes. So I think there is progress. I think they are making progress in terms of bringing some of the police officers who might be responsible to trial. But it is a slow process, and there's a real problem, it seems, of resources. And I think it's going to take a very long time unless there's an increase in resources. You're welcome. Thank you.